Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description notes below the video where you will find links to all of my online shenanigans, including how to get a pattern of mine to knit up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, how to support me on Patreon, and where to get Watch Barbara Knit merchandise. Today we're going to have a little chit chat about a specific type of fiber. I will put links to other fiber chat type things I've had. I've talked about cotton yarns, I've talked about silk yarns, I've talked about wool yarns, and understanding your fibers and understanding how they behave and how to care for them can really be a secret to a more successful project. And the fiber specific type that I want to talk about today is one that is frequently misunderstood. And that's why I want to talk about it, because there are people out there who misunderstand and have the idea that rayon is a synthetic fiber, i.e. that it's plastic. They think that rayon belongs in the same category and consideration and everything as acrylic, polyester, or nylon, all of which are synthetic fibers. Synthetic meaning that they are derived from plastic. They're derived from they're petroleum products. They're derived from what is essentially a non-organic in general. Please don't come at me with like, well, yeah, oil originally came from dinosaurs, so theoretically it's like organic. Yeah, you know what? I'm not a chemist and I'm not a scientist. And so I really can't get into those deep details, and that's not what this video is about. But I want to give you like a layman's understanding of this so you have enough information to know what you need to know as a fiber crafter, like a knitter or crocheter, how these things behave in yarn. So really and truly, if I've got something that's scientifically inaccurate as far as it's like a nuance kind of thing. Now, if I'm totally just dead up wrong on something, fine. I am open to learning stuff. That's what this channel is all about. But if it's like a splitting hairs kind of thing, or you didn't get that quite right, I mean, if you want to put it in the comments, feel free, but I'm not gonna feel bad about it because I'm not pretending to. I mean, if you're looking at Beaker and Bunsen Honeydew, I am definitely Beaker. I'm me and blowing stuff up. I am not the person who is going to be able to give you the diagram of the chemical structure or anything like that, but I can tell you how these fibers behave in yarns and give you a good idea of how you can apply that information to your knitting or crocheting or fiber crafting. So, rayon is like an overall umbrella term, and there are all kinds of fibers that fall under the concept of rayon. And one of the really interesting things is that rayon is actually the earliest man-made fiber. And it is a man-made fiber. I said it's not synthetic. It is man-made. It falls into the category of a man-made cellulosic fiber. Cellulose being the building blocks of plants. You're saying that it is coming from plants. So it's made out of cellulose. It starts with an organic product, and then we dink around with it and made it into something else. And it's kind of funny because it's kind of in its own way similar to paper. It's just that they've been doing that kind of thing with paper for a really long time. So rayon was actually invented in the late 1800s, and it can be broken down into three rough categories, which is based on how the rayon is created. The first kind I can't pronounce, and it's not something you're really going to run into. It's like the original one, and it's almost not used much anymore. The second one, and I have notes, by the way, not that anyone else would, but I want to try to keep myself focused, so I have notes for you. So the first one is an obsolete process that they don't really use anymore, and then the second one to come about was actually viscose, which I'm sure you've heard that term, and then you get into lyocell. So lyocell is like, I think viscose was like the 1950s and lyocell is more like 1980s. So these are two different techniques that were developed. So at the base, what rayon is they take a tree, pretty much. Beech is very common. I have a note here. So base viscose, you can look at beech, pine, spruce, hemlock, eucalyptus, bamboo, soy, and sugarcane. All of those are commonly used as the source material for the cellulose. And then that cellulose is like kind of, think of like brewed up in a vat kind of situation. It has a chemical applied to it that breaks it down and turns it into like a slurry, and it goes through a whole washing process. And there's, in viscose, there's water involved, and there's this whole washing process, and then you have like this sludgy kind of thing, and then that sludgy kind of thing is like forced through a spinneret machine kind of situation that spins out the fibers. And again, it's much more complicated with that, but then they take those fibers and that's what they make the fabric or yarn out of. So that's viscose. Lyocell came later, and lyocell is actually an answer to the fact that the process of making viscose is a very wastewater intensive, and you use a lot of water and that water gets disposed of, and it's kind of nasty because it's had all these chemicals on it. So I think it was something like 200 tons of water for 1 ton of fabric or something like that. I think I read that, could be wrong. I don't remember numbers well, but it's a lot. So you have a lot of wastewater and there's a lot of yuckiness involved. So it's not necessarily the world's most environmentally friendly process. Whereas lyocell, instead of using water to create the slurry, water and chemicals, they use a solvent, a different solvent that is not water, and chemicals. And lyocell is created in a closed system. So they use those, that chemically, whatever, the concoction, the cocktail that they use to break the cellulose down is in a closed system. So they use it over and over and over again, and there's not really much, if any, water involved. So lyocell is actually a much more environmentally friendly process, and the process is more like physical than it is chemical. So it does less damage to the cellulose, and then it does different things. So you have your Tencel. I keep wanting to say Tencel because I knew people are like, what's Tencel? Tencel is simply a brand name process of lyocell. And there are different. So lyocell is like the generic name, and then there are different. So if you ever see something that it's got a little circle R by it or something, Tencel is a brand name. It is a specific company that makes Tencel. Tencel is a lyocell, and it is a rayon. So you have rayon, you have like rayon umbrella. Under the rayon umbrella, you have all these other things. Well, you have two different things. You have your viscose and you have your lyocell, and then you have things under lyocell and things under viscose. If you see something that's just simply labeled rayon, with no other information, more likely than not, it is a viscose, because the process, the lyocell process, is actually more expensive. So if it's a lyocell, then they're going to really advertise that. They're going to make a big deal about that because it costs more money to make it. So again, so if it just says rayon, high probability that it's viscose. Whereas if it says lyocell or Tencel, it is the different process, the more eco-friendly. And I have, so this is a Lion brand. This is called Nubu, and this is a 100% lyocell product. So it says it very clearly, and this says the eco-friendly production of lyocell, a fabric made from plants, leads the fiber industry in terms of energy and water conservation. So that's Nubu, which I believe is mostly bamboo. I don't think it says on here because they don't necessarily have to tell you what it is made out of. Now this is Trubu, which specifically says it's 100% rayon from bamboo. But since it just says rayon, there's a very high probability this is a viscose product, because if it was the eco-friendly one, they would definitely use that as their advertisement. And so I'm trying to see. Yeah, 100% rayon from bamboo is all we got here. And these are both, if you could feel them, they're actually different in texture. And what that is so you've got what I said, they extrude it, you've got the slurry situation, and then they spin it out, and that's for viscose. You also have another word you might run across is modal, M-O-D-A-L. Again, that's another like patented kind of thing. One thing about modal is beech. That is the wood that it is made out of. Modal is made out of beech. I'm trying to see if I wrote any more. Modal has a different technique. Instead of the spinnerets, it's forced out of like larger, it's extruded. And it's a smoother fiber, which makes modal closer to a silk product. It's going to drape more like silk. It's going to behave and look more, it's going to be shinier. So modal was really created to be a silk substitute. And honestly, all of those. Viscose was invented as an attempt to make fake silk, artificial silk. That is what they were trying to do. So all of these are silky-ish, but the modal specifically is, because it has a different extrusion factor and because it's only beech, has just different properties. So that is modal if you run across that. Lyocell has a more cottony feel to it, the way it is produced. Lyocell is more, I mean, my notes. Lyocell is stronger. Okay, viscose gets weaker when it's wet. You got to be real careful with it, and that's where we get into blocking. You can totally 100% block viscose, but you need to be a little gentle with it when you're blocking with it because it gets weaker when it is wet. But tencel or lyocell actually doubles in strength when it is wet. So it is actually a stronger, it's a sturdier fabric, a sturdier fiber than viscose. It is more absorbent than viscose. So like if you're making a summer weight garment, if you're making something that needs to be worn under heat, and actually I think it's one of those reasons, so this Nubu specifically says that it is approved by the, I don't know if I can focus that, knitted knockers. And that I'm willing to wager is because of the absorbance factor, and it's soft and it's silky and it breathes really, really well. Knitted knockers are actually, it's an organization that has these knitting and crochet patterns where you can create prosthetic inserts for people who have had mastectomies and wish to try to maintain the appearance that they previously had. So that is, again, it's a reflection of lyocell's specific attributes of being more cottony, stronger, more absorbent, and like a lighter, more breathable fiber. And viscose is delicate when wet. It is still a very breathable fiber. Viscose is excellent in summer weight and warm weather garments, but it's just not as much as the lyocell or tencel. And again, tencel, lyocell, there are differences in between. Like tencel, I'm sure, has very specific attributes that they allowed them to like patent it or circle R it or whatever they did to it. And there are all different kinds of lyocells. So let me see if I've gotten all my notes. Yes, it's closed loop system. Okay, so that's all. I wanted to try to get the sciencey stuff and like the real. So it is. You gotta be a little bit of a chemist, a scientist to understand some of this stuff. Now let's get to the knitting part. I've touched on it briefly. So viscose was invented to try to replicate the attributes of silk, and it's pretty successful in that way. So it really kind of behaves when knitting similar to silk in that, and I think it's funny that they call the device that they force the slurry through a spinneret, because that's also what is in a spider's butt. Because so I think of silk and spiders, but actually we all know that the silk that we knit with comes from moths. But it kind of, I don't know if moths have spinnerets. I don't know. I'm sure that there is someone who is incredibly into moths that can answer that question. I don't know how moths make this silk. Oh man, I'm so easily distracted. Sorry, y'all. So, yarn that has 100% or a large viscose content is going to be very drapey. It's going to be floopy. It's going to have most of the time it's going to have a silkier kind of hand. It's going to be smoother. And it doesn't really have a lot of memory. So it's not something that is going to hold its shape very well. And especially the heavier the garment gets, the more likely it is that it is going to like stretch. So it's a really good choice to something that you want to be smooth and flowy and drapey. Not a good choice for something that you want to have body or structure. So like a heavily cabled sweater, it's not going to be a good choice for that. Unless you want a drapey cabled sweater. I don't know. It's just not what I would choose. You just need to play to the strengths of the fiber. It can be absolutely amazing for shawls and lace because, again, it's going to drape, it's going to flow, it's going to be beautiful, but it's going to be the kind of lace that, you know, it's just going to hang. It's not going to stand out by itself at all because it is a very drapey, very low memory type of thing. When you are knitting with it, because it doesn't really have any stretch, it might put a little bit of extra stress on your hands, like when you're working with a plant fiber, like when you're working with a linen or a cotton, you might get that stress on your hands, so be careful with that. It's going to bring a lot of breathability, and as I said with lyocell, it's going to bring absorbency. Modal, also silkiness and absorbency. So those are things that are good for warm weather garments or for like an undergarment. If you are in a really cold weather situation and you want to make like a thin garment to go under a heavier garment that would keep your body like wick away kind of situation, that might be a good solution. Honestly, if you were going to knit undergarments, the lyocell would be an excellent choice for an undergarment. Now, the actual knitting process, because of its behavior, because of its slickness, because of the way it is, they do tend to be splitty. They are slick, and so they're going to slide very easily on your needle, and they're going to be sort of splitty. I can show you, you can see on this, I think that this one is like a whole bunch of small fibers. And so if you might want to avoid like using a really pointy needle, you want more of a blunt needle, and especially also you might want to consider a wooden needle instead of a metal needle, because that'll help you and give you a little bit more grip on the yarn and combat its tendency to slip or like lose stitches. And again, speaking of losing stitches, because it's slick, if you do drop a stitch, it's going to run. It is going to run like a marathon. It's just gonna go because there's no memory and there's no grabbiness to these yarns most of the time, so it's just gonna pop straight down. So you got to be careful about that. All this being said, they're constantly coming up with new fiber yarn structures, so all of it is going to specifically depend on the yarn that you are using. And the number one most important thing you need to do is read the care information to know how this yarn needs to be cared for. And I would highly encourage you to make and block a swatch so that you can know how this yarn is going to behave and what it likes and what it doesn't like before you invest the time in making a larger item. I know that a lot of us don't like making swatches, but the thing I like less than making making swatches is making something that took 80 hours and it not being the right size, or washing it and it falling and doing stuff that I don't want it to do. I'd rather spend the extra time to make sure I'm going to have a successful project than jump in blindly. But I'm very conservative when it comes to those sorts of things. And I know there's a lot more adventurous knitters out there. So you do you. But the best way to know is to work with the yarn. But what happens, and what I said is there's all different kinds of structures, is that so they extrude the fibers, but then there's like 4 or 5 different, I was reading the stages of it and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's like, they chunk it up and they put it back together and they chunk it up and so they like chop it up and mix it up and they do what they want to it to create the fiber structure that they are looking for in the fabric or the yarn. And they're constantly playing with different ways to do it. And since this is completely manufactured, it's a completely man-made product, there's always people coming up with new and different ways to do it. So while in general, these types of yarns are slippery, it is possible that there is a yarn company that has put the time into developing a specific technique to make the yarn not slippery. So it might be out there. And as I said, modal and viscose are more silky, whereas the lyocell is more of a cottony texture. They can change the textures of these yarns. And another whole different category is novelty yarns. A lot of the novelty yarns out there are made out of rayon. And they'll have like metallic elements in it and everything. And those are all going to behave very, very differently. So you just need to get to know the yarn that you're using. But hopefully all of this information I've given you gives you a better idea of what exactly all of these scientific sounding words that end up on your yarn label mean. What is rayon? What is viscose? What is lyocell? What is tencel? What is modal? All of these words, they all kind of mean the same thing, but there are subtle differences, and it depends on you what you want to choose for your personal projects. You can wet block. It is a natural fiber. It can be wet blocked. When I'm talking about blocking, I'm talking about wet block. You can steam block these, but I would be more careful because heating them up, especially if it's one of the yarns that you've specifically selected because it has a silky shine to it, heat blocking using steam can actually dull that shine. It just kind of knocks it out, especially if it's like something that has like a metallic thing. I have tried to steam block something that had like the sparkly things in it, and it actually killed it, because the sparkly bits in it are straight up plastic, and it melted it, and it was silver, and then it turned, it just kind of went matte. So it lost all of its shine. So again, that's where your swatch is going to come in. If you really want to heat block something, you need to test that on a smaller area before you do it to your entire project. Obviously, you can find a lot of yarns that have viscose mixed into other natural fibers, with cotton, with wool, with anything. You can find it mixed in, and what that's going to do is shift the properties of that base fiber and bring in the other elements. A lot of times they're mixing it in because they want to lighten it up. Like if it's wool, they're going to mix in the lyocell to bring in that absorbance. Well, wool's absorbent. You bring in the lyocell, it's also absorbent, but it's more cottony and it's going to be lighter. And it is lighter weight than actual cotton, because cotton is a very heavy fiber. So it's just bringing other things to the party. But since now you know that rayon is not a plastic, it is a natural fiber, that you can block it like you block it just like you would any other wool garment. You block it just like you would any other cotton garment. You don't have to worry about that viscose or lyocell or that rayon being blended into it causing a problem like an acrylic would. Acrylic doesn't wet block, and it will cause problems when you try to wet block acrylic blends. That is not a concern when you are dealing with viscose or rayon, because it's a natural fiber. It's a man-made cellulosic fiber. And let me see where my timer is. I have been talking about this for a long time. I'm willing to wager that not a whole lot of you got to the very end. But if you're as fascinated as I am about fiber like this and you've gotten to the very end, let me know in the comments that you got to the end, and I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up, click that like button, and if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much.